right now is we are at the beginning of the fourth chapter, Parak Daled of Kohelet, of the book of Ecclesiastes. And we, not the beginning, we started it last week. We saw the first 3 verses last week, and this week we're going to start with verse number 4. As I said last week, he does seem to, in a rare case, we do find that the chapters line up with kind of the section headers. So with chapter 4, he did begin a new concept, which is really a review of what he said in the past, but now he's going a little deeper into it. And that again was this idea of oppression. So where he brought up the end of chapter 3, he brought up this idea of the oppressive authoritarian, the person who goes ahead and uses their power to rule over other people, not for their benefit, for their own benefit. So and that he was speaking about the evils of such a person and what that person does for society. And again, one of the things that he mentioned in the verses we saw last week was he brings up this idea that there is, actually, let me go back a second before that. In the end of the 3rd chapter, when first talking about this, he mentions this idea of it being Hevel. And we've said before, the idea of Hevel, even though it's commonly translated as futility, that's not actually a perfect translation. Really what we find with the idea of Hevel is, it's like steam. Right? Literally, the word Hevel means steam. And the idea that we seem to find in steam is that although for your average person it's going to be useless, in most cases it's going to be useless, but there is a way to gain something from it. If you find a way to distill it, there is something to gain from it. But that's going to be a lot of hard work to do that. Distilling is not a simple process. So in that sense, he uses this term of Hevel when talking about oppression. That's a strange thing for us to see, as you know, when we talk about somebody who is oppressed and going through an oppressive system, it is strange to say that that person is Hevel, meaning that there's something good coming out of it. That's a hard thing to get into. And so that's what we're going to touch on this week. Again, last week, just to recap one last thing from last week he spoke about the person who has no hope, the person who cannot find the power to move on from their situation. That person, unfortunately, is, because they don't have hope, they are hopeless, if that makes any sense. As opposed to most of us, we are in situations where no matter how deep and down in the dumps we are, there are ways to rise out of it, and that is the condition of most of humanity, I would say. So, without any further ado, I'm going to share the screen. We will see where we're up to. Okay. All right, this is our text over here. And as usual, I always like to point out, I do not provide you with the translation on the page because we go through the translation, we try to get a more precise translation. So I meant to start verse number 4 last week, but I don't think I did actually in the end, and which actually works out pretty well. So verse 4 says like this. 1 second. Okay, so we begin by saying like this. Vira'iti ani, and I have seen, right? So he said this, he's used this phrase a number of times already. This vira'iti ani, I have seen. Et kol amal, all of the hard work. Veit kol kishron, and all of the kishron. We have seen it before actually, but I'll hold off from translating it for a second. Sorry, veit kol kishron hamasa, all the kishron of the actions. Ki hikin at ish mere'ehu. It is, behold, or because it is, the jealousy of mankind from each other, from their friends. Gam hevel urut ruach. This too is hevel, and it is spirit breaking, breaks the spirit. Okay, I'm gonna go through that one more time. This time I'll translate the word kishron. Or actually, before I do that, let's just get into that for 1 second. Kishron, that we've seen this before. Actually, it came up earlier I think it was in the 3rd chapter. Kishron is this idea of preparation. Okay, in the root there being kosher or kosher, right? So when you talk about food being kosher, that means it's been prepared. It's been prepared with the proper rules of kosher food preparation. So in this case, also, kishron means a preparation, but it's also a putting into action. So actually, in modern Hebrew, we refer to exercise as kosher. Same root word. The idea again being that it's preparing your body, you're making your body fitness, right? So again, let's see the verse all together another time. Veriti ani, I have seen, et kol amal, all of the hard work, ve'et kol kishron ha'ma'aseh, and all the preparation for action, all the making fit of action, and what is my outcome of it? Ki hi kinat ish me're'ehu, it is, behold, it is the jealousy of mankind from each other. Gam hevel, and this itself is hevel, again, this not quite useless, but mostly useless thing, or ut ruach, and it is spirit breaking. So in this verse over here, he shows us a number of interesting things. I would say, first of all, before getting into the words here, we've seen now where King Solomon has presented this idea of oppression and particularly of control, the way that humans, different people, groups of people control other people. And he's mentioned to us that there is both a necessary element to it and a how do I want to put this? Let me think through this for a second. When it comes to the idea of oppression, there is something gained and something that needs to be kept in mind. So, for example, he said earlier that if you have people who are in power or in position of power, it is their obligation of let's say what we call the privileged party, is the obligation of the privileged party to go ahead and try to find ways to improve the lives of those around them. Or we saw where he said that when a person, if you believe that you deserve goodness, and when you think about why is it that I deserve goodness because I'm a human being, because I'm endowed by God with life, because I'm here, because I contribute to society. So those same reasons apply to everyone around you. Or whatever reason you have for why you deserve goodness is the same reason why the next person deserves goodness and all those around you. It's a equalizing factor. The need for the need for everyone to have good done to them and be treated properly. So in that sense, you find this idea of inequality, of people on top and people on bottom. You find that and you say, there's something that has to be done here. We have to find some way to create some level of equality between the two parties. And again, equality I know is a very heavy word, and it contains a lot of meaning, particularly right now in our modern rhetoric, right? But just to take a step back from that and think of equality just in, yes, it's the job of those who have the power to find ways to share that to some degree with everybody else. At the same time, you cannot have a perfectly equal society. That doesn't work, and it doesn't last. So you will end up losing things like progress. You'll end up losing any chance for success or for that push for people to be better and to do better. And that's kind of what he's touching on over here. He says there's this thing of kina. So that shoresh will be a kuf nun aleph, that is jealousy. All right. So there is this idea of jealousy that a person is spurred by the need to outdo the other person, or at least to live up to the other person's existence. Right. We live in a society surrounded by other people, and we have this desire, this push to go ahead and at least live as good of a life as we can, or maybe perhaps in some cases we try to live better than we can. We see what other people have, that pushes us forward. That in and of itself is a necessary item, a necessary piece of a social order. You need to have that in order for society to keep moving. So in that way, he says that what is it? What lies behind the hard work? What lies behind all the preparation that's done for action? Well, that's kina. That is the drive, that human spirit. That there's a word I'm losing, but for some reason. But yeah, we have this need to go ahead and try to be better. Either better in our own way or better than the other person, and that's what spurs society on. At the same,
a quick question.
yeah.
I'm struggling with the context a little bit. Can you scroll the page a little so I can see the previous verse for just a sec?
Yes. Now the previous verse I'm gonna admit is a little hard to read in the context. This is where he's saying that somebody who is in a situation, when a person is left in a situation where they have no hope, there is no way out. So he uses some pretty dark terminology. He says that in that case, I praise the dead over the living, and better than either of them is the one who never had a chance to live. Now we said last week, or I suggested last week, he's not talking about us, your average person. He's talking about a specific case of somebody who has no way out of their lowliness, which again is not us. we hopefully find a way out, and we assume that there's always a way out. But that's where he's saying, in that case, if we assume that such a thing exists, that there are people who are oppressed to the point where there's no way out. So he says, I understand that there's a place to say, Shabeach ani et hametim, that I praise the dead over the living. Now I'm saying he's shifting a little bit over here in this fourth verse. And he's saying, so let's take a look. He's recalling what we said before, which is that you have a need for power, inequality of power. That does create, that does do something for society. Again, that's, I think, why he's particularly using this word hevel, because as kind of terrible as it is, and as hard it is for us to fathom, there's something that is gained out of it, right? So it's, the society does grow from this kina, this jealousy that spurs people on, that pushes people, and that's what makes society better. In one example that pops into mind, and this is obviously an extreme example, but medicine would be anywhere near where it is right now if it wasn't for some people doing some terrible things. The dissecting bodies, which often came from robbed graves, and also human dissection, right? So we have something which is really kind of terrible, but it leads to something that is for the betterment of society, and you find that systematically throughout the history of the world. Not such great things can lead to better outcomes, and I would say that the same thing is true with certain systems of oppression. Again, not saying that they're the right thing to do. Again, that was what he already discussed. Before any of this discussion, he puts at the end of chapter 3 that it's the job of the ruling class, of the privileged class, to try to include and make everything better for everybody else, and to not use that, not lord over the other people. At the same time, there is something gained to society from that. So I think that's why he uses this term hevel, again, which is that's our clue that it's something really gross, but also leads to something good. Okay, or with enough work, we could distill it and find the goodness. Okay, and so again, he also refers to this as ruach, which means spirit breaking, which means, yeah, it's a hard pill to swallow, that there is something perhaps gained from a lot of these situations, while also, and again, we can never forget that first step of, and if you're in that position, make sure that you're doing what you can to help out those less fortunate than yourself. It's almost like a necessary evil for the progress of humanity. And it's a struggle for us to work out. But we personally live in a amazing. I keep on mentioning this throughout the classes, that if you were ever to live in any time of history, you would want to live in this century, right? The late 20th century and early 21st century are fantastic times to live, even with the few hiccups that we've had. COVID being the most recent and obvious example. But even so, you'd want to live now more than any other time in history, and that's because of hard work and the things built for us by previous generations. Now, some of those previous generations built those things on the backs of on the backs of the proletariat, if you will, right? So, but we are benefiting from it, and now we're able to actually make moves to correct those previous injustices. So I think those are all, again, it's this weird hybrid, or you have to hold two things in your mind at the same time. While there is an evil or something that's not necessarily good, but it also creates a betterment for everybody. So I think that's one of the things he's saying over here. And again, this is why King Solomon's or Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, is so difficult to understand in the first place, is because he does require you to hold two seemingly incompatible thoughts in your mind at the same time, and say that this thing that is both this one item can be both bad and good at the same time. And he is going to do that a lot in this book. We've already seen it plenty of times. So that, let me read verse number 4 one more time before we move on to verse number 5. So again, Veriti ani, I have seen, at kol amol, all the hard work, that kol kishon ha'maaseh, and all of the preparation to action. What is it? Ki hikinat ish mirehu. It is the jealousy of people from each other. Gam ze hevel u'rut ruach. So at the same time, it is also hevel. It is both hevel and ru'ut ruach. It is spirit breaking, but there is something to gain from it, even though for the most part it's a difficult thing to handle. Okay. With that, we're going to move on to verse number 5. It's a short verse, but I think it actually contains a lot in it also. Oops. There we go. I have it highlighted there. So he says like this: Hakisil, the fool, chovek et yadav, hugs his hands. Literally, it means he hugs his hands together. Ve'ochel et bisaro, and eats his flesh, or their flesh. So the fool, let me get one more time. Hakisil, fool, chovek et yadav, hugs or folds their hands. Ve'ochel et bisaro, and eats their flesh. All right, their own flesh. Okay, so again, a short verse and seemingly out of context, right? Without a context over here, it seems very out of place. So again, the fool, which he hasn't brought up the fool in a while now. The fool is he did mention the fool again in the 2nd chapter when he had his whole crisis of faith with wisdom. If you recall back from the end of the 2nd chapter, he had a hard time. He was struggling with the whole idea of wisdom. And he brought up the fool there also. And he said the wise person and the kasil, the fool, end up in the same place. So what good is wisdom anyway? And we said that was one of his big questions on wisdom. So this is his second time. I'm sorry. This is the second time he's bringing up the fool. And he's going to bring it up a couple more times again throughout the book. So here we have again the fool. This is the person who's not engaged in wisdom. Folds their hands. I'm just going to use the term folds their hands, even though literally it's to hug their hands together. The fool folds his hands, v'ochel pesaro, and eats his own flesh. Okay. Now I want to argue that the word kasil is a very specific word for fool. What exactly is foolishness in the eyes of King Solomon? He used this term kasil, and I have a hard time. It doesn't show up very often throughout the Tanakh, this term kasil. So really the question would be, what is this term specifically trying to show us? Is it just somebody who doesn't have wisdom, or is it a very specific term? And I'd like to argue that it is a specific terminology when we refer to the Kasil. And actually, it occurred to me as I was preparing this that in this week's Parsha, so the Torah reading from this week, and this coming Shabbat, this word is going to show up, Kesel, this shorash at least. The Chaf Samech Lamed is going to show up. And there it's referring to actually some of the inner organs of the cow. We're talking about the sacrifices that are brought in the Beit HaMikdash, or in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle in the desert. So it talks about Kohelet al hakisalim, the fats. There are certain fats which are on certain parts of the body. And those fats, they're forbidden to eat. You have to burn them on the altar, or leave them over and burn them after the time of the korban, after the time of the sacrifice is over. So a kesel is this idea of an organ or anything really that is layered with fat. It's covered in fat. In that sense, I want to understand the kasil, the fool, is somebody who has so much information covering their brain that they have a hard time actually thinking straight, right? I always like the phrase that, certain ideas are so convoluted and complex and not understandable that only an academic can understand them, right? Some things are so crazy only an academic can believe them. It's an idea that people say. I think that's kind of what we're saying over here. Is a kesel, a ksil, is somebody who's got has been trained in such a way of thinking that they can no longer see straight. They can't think straight and can't think for themselves anymore. And so in regards to our discussion over here, we're talking about systems of oppression. And we're saying that, yeah, they're terrible things, but there's something important, something that is gained for the betterment of society through these occasional systems of oppression. Again, not to say that they should be done. There's always that obligation for us to rectify it. But at the same time, there is something that is gained from it. What does the fool do? The fool says, you know what, this is just bad. It's just bad. And because it's coming from a bad place, I will have nothing to do with it. So what is the kasil? The kasil is the fool who is chovek et yadav. Again, folds their hands and doesn't want to have any part in it. They say, you know what, because this came from something wrong, I can have no part in this thing. And because of that, because this person isn't going to not engage in society, because society uses systems of oppression. How can I engage in society at all? That person will eventually be left v'ochel et bisaro, eating their own flesh. Meaning, if you're not going to engage in society because you have this, you're stuck on this one point, basically. If a person's stuck on this one point and says, you know what, I'm just signing out because I can't have anything to do with this. It's just wrong and I can't deal with it. So that person, unfortunately, is going to end up ochelet b'saro, eating their own flesh, meaning to say that they're losing all their. First of all, they lose their stake in the conversation. They lose their ability to even make a difference by folding their cards and saying I'm out. They can't even make a difference at that point. Right? The point is, we're supposed to use the power that we have, that we are given. We're supposed to try to find a way to use that for the betterment of society. The person just says, I'm out. I'm having nothing to do with this. They go off the grid, so to speak. So that type of person, unfortunately, can't even make a constructive impression. They can't do anything for the betterment of society. Right? We have a lot of people now. I mean, we live in Portland, right? So we've seen this a lot. People who are so upset over systems of oppression, which obviously there's something to fix there, right? We have a lot of things that need to be fixed in our society, but they get so worked up over it to the point where they just go on a destructive rampage, right? We've seen that happen to our own city, and to the point where parts of our city are, being torn down and burned and etc. So that is unconstructive at a certain point, is destructive at a certain point. So that, again, the person who's so covered in their way of thinking, can't see beyond themselves, they just fold their hands. They say, I'm out. There's this everything. They tear it all down, burn it to the ground, and that again will lead to Kohelet b'saro. Their own lives they're forfeiting their own lives, their own stake in their own stake in helping, and their own stake in enjoying their lives. Again, the ultimate goal of the book of Ecclesiastes, the ultimate goal of Kohelet is to find the path to happiness, right? So this person is officially deemed as somebody who will not find the path to happiness, right? If you're always going to be worked up over everything and not find a way to contribute, you're only going to be destructive. So you're going to be left with ochel et b'saro, eating your own flesh. Let me read the verse one more time, because I think this is an important verse. But while short and sweet, I think it gets to the point very quickly. Again, Hakasil, the fool, choveket yadav, folds their hands, v'ochelet b'saro, and eats their own flesh. So, yeah, again, the idea then being, so we've got this destructive force, number one destructive force of this oppressive society. We've got also a call to not be inactive, at the same time, to find where there's constructiveness in this destructive force. So we've got this multi-layered, and again, that's King Solomon showing us you got to hold two things in your mind at the same time. You can have complaints against society, an oppressive society. You can also not be complacent and check out of the entire thing. You have to stake your claim in it and do what you can to make improvements. And again, that was the main point of the end of the third chapter, which is that you have to, if you want to find happiness, improving the lives for other people, the lives of other people is going to be one of our main goals in that when doing that. We're going to be trying, if you want to find happiness, you want to learn how to improve the lives of other people. And so here's finally where he gets to an important word, and in verse number 6 over here. Verse number 6, he starts off with a word that we've been looking for this whole time, and that word is tov, goodness. Okay, meaning to say that King Solomon has avoided using good and bad, right? We've been very clear about that since the beginning, is that we have avoided using the terms good and bad. He said there's do good with other people, but we never said what good is. So finally he's giving us a translation of the word good, of tov. What is tov? What is goodness? So tov in this situation, what is tov? Melo chaf nachat. It is one full hand of nachat. We'll get to that in a second. What exactly is nachat? Or as we would say in modern, in Yiddishized version, you would call it nachas. Okay, if you might have heard that term before. So one handful of nachas is better, that is good, when compared with mimelo chafnayim amal urutruach, 2 hands full of hard work and back-breakingness, spirit breakingness. Okay, so again, let's translate that one more time. Tov, what is good? Melo chaf nachat, 1 handful of nachat, that's better, mimelo chafnayim amal urutruach, from 2 hands full of hard work and spirit breakings. Okay, so we have over here King Solomon telling us that we want to know what good is. I'm finally going to give you a translation of the word good. Good is 1 handful of nachat. So nachat is, we're looking at a lot of the commentaries. The term nachat is related to the term menucha, which means a resting place, a place to rest. Okay, or rest in general, the noun resting, or verb, I guess, the verb resting. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so menucha meaning where we rest or the act of resting. So 1 handful that comes along with resting is better than 2 hands full of hard work and spirit breaking. Now that's a hard thing already for us to understand. On the face, we're going to run into a problem. we always we glorify hard work. Right? Hard work is what gets us far, obviously. So I don't think he's downplaying hard work itself. What I think he's talking about something specific over here. When we talk about menucha, so let's take the noun version of menucha, right? A resting place. We actually find this term used when Moshe Rabbeinu is going ahead and reviewing the Torah throughout the book of Deuteronomy, throughout the book of Devarim. He mentions at one point, it's in Parshat Ekev, if I remember correctly. Ekev or I don't remember exactly. But he mentions over there that we're going to continue using the tabernacle as long as we have not reached the menucha and the nachala. So menucha meaning the resting place, and nachala meaning the place of inheritance. So the rabbis understand, the sages understand that's referring to two periods in history. We continued to use the portable tabernacle until we got to the city of Shiloh, where we made a more permanent tabernacle. It wasn't a mobile, it was an immobile, it was a stationary tabernacle. And that was referred to by the name of menucha. And then eventually we got it to Jerusalem, when King David brings everything to Jerusalem. So that is when we reached nachala, which is inheritance. So the idea of menucha, meaning a resting place, a place where you could finally settle down for a little bit. In that sense, my understanding is it's a place that you can call your own, a place that you can call home, a place that you can stake a claim, lay a claim in. So in that sense over here, what is goodness? Goodness is finding a way for a person to do work, even if it's less work, but it's work that they could call their own, that they could take ownership of, that they could be productive in and call their own, to claim as a menucha. That is better, even if it's less work in the end, even if it's less outcome in the end. That is better than 2 hands full that comes through wasted work, spirit breaking work, hard work, meaning hard in the sense that it doesn't match you, it doesn't connect with you at all. So in that sense, I think what he's saying over here is, where are we going to find that sweet medium for society? That's not oppression, but it's also not nothing. It's not inaction. Where there has to be this middle ground. And again, that's going to be, as you already mentioned, it is going to be moderated by the powerful. That's just a reality of life. But what we need to find is a place where each individual person can find their place, where they can feel like they're contributing to the greater society, where they can feel like they're doing what actually fits them. And even if it's less work in the end, you'll get more out of that than this useless hard work. We saw that, a lot. I mean, I didn't, but the generation before me saw that a lot with the Soviet Union, right? Where you had people who worked for their entire lives in factories that actually weren't producing anything. They were just, servants of the state, or the comrades of the state, if you will, right? And they didn't. They were actually useless. They were just cogs in a machine that weren't being used for any purpose. So on the other hand, we have also societies where people are not contributing at all, right? So what is that happy medium? It's where people find their place. And again, that will probably be moderated by the powerful, but people will find their place in where it's appropriate, where they're going to gain the most from. And even if it's where they match the most, even if they're going to gain physically less from it. The sages over here actually give us a number of examples where they apply this verse. Now, not how we're reading it. They apply it a little differently, but the idea is the same. They bring up this idea. I have a list over here in my notes. Number 1, if a person has opportunity to learn Torah, right? So what should they focus their learning Torah? Well, it's better to learn a small amount that you can actually put into application, that you can actually apply and use, than to learn a ton that you're actually not going to ever get around to using, right? Meaning, if you're going to dedicate time and you only have a limited amount of time, focus that time that you have for learning Torah on something that you're actually going to be able to apply. And perhaps don't focus as much on those things that you're not going to be able to apply. They say the same thing with tzedakah. If you have opportunity to give tzedakah, to give charity, give that from your own instead of stealing from other people to give out charity. Right? Don't rob from the rich to give to the poor. Figure out a way that you can give of your own to the poor, to the needy, to those who need it. Again, a little different take on it, but again, they're applying the same idea that a small amount that comes through appropriate means is better than a large amount if it's being done wrong. Okay, they say the same thing by investments. Invest a little bit of your own money. This is the Sage's Guide to Investing. I don't know if it matches Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or any of those, but the Sage's Guide to Investing is use your money, invest the little bit that you have, invest it wisely, but don't go borrowing large sums just to invest it and then potentially lose everything. And then you also owe money for the money that you borrowed. Figure out how to do what you can with what you have instead of borrowing from others. They give an example also of a gardener. It's kind of funny when you see society from a societal perspective, how life has changed between now and the times that the sages were writing. They say, if you want to be a great gardener, buy that one garden and do it really well. Don't buy a bunch of gardens and not do any of them well. It's really the idea is don't spread yourself out too thin. Figure out where you could use your abilities the best and do a good job, as opposed to trying to do everything and not doing anything well. They also, in a very different way, they bring up this idea when talking about this world and the next world. I don't exactly understand how this fits in, but they say the world to come, one moment of the world to come is going to be better than all the goodness of this world put together. That's it's mentioned in a number of places, but primarily in the book of Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avot. They mention that over there. So also, one small amount of one thing can be better than a whole bunch of another thing. Yeah, I mean, those are the main things. Actually, there's one more case which I want to bring up because I love this example. Is the sages bring up one more idea that there's flower offerings that were brought in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple. Flower offerings which are not worth very much money. It's pretty cheap. You just bring a certain amount of flour, oil, maybe frankincense, and in some situations, and you would bring that to the temple. And who brings that offering? The poor person, right? The poor person brings that offering because they don't have the money for a bull, a ram, a sheep, a goat. So the rabbis say that small amount, that handful, again, that's quite literally a handful. So that works very well with the wording of this verse over here. One handful of goodness is better than two hands full that come through struggle and spirit breaking. And actually, it mentions that what is two hands full? Two hands full is there's we have that's what it is. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, on Yom Kippur would bring in two hands full of incense to the Holy of Holies. It's basically the greatest sacrifice brought throughout the entire year. And King Solomon is telling us, actually, the poor person giving the little bit that he has is better than that most important sacrifice of the entire year. I just like that idea. This idea, both what the sages are saying over here and kind of our take on it, it's all similar. The basic idea is we have to find that happy medium where, on a personal level, we're doing what we can, we're contributing where we can, and not stretching ourselves too thin. But also on the societal level, oppression is no good, inaction is no good. Right? You have two extremes. We can find a happy medium. There is a possibility of doing that on a societal level too. It's the fool who says it's all bad, I'm checking out, and it's the evil person, the wicked person, who says, you know what, we have to have progress. I will subjugate all the masses and make them do my will in the name of progress. Both of those are bad choices. The appropriate choice is each person individually and on a societal level, finding the appropriate happy medium where they're contributing but not spreading themselves too thin, where they're being part of the solution and not part of either of the problems. So that's it for this week. We're going to jump in next week. We're going to jump into verse 7, where he's going to again rehash another idea, starting again with those same words, v'shavti ani, which we saw at the beginning of the chapter in verse 1. He's going to